Having formal education is a huge advantage. Don't kid yourselves into thinking that just because technology is a space where people without degrees can get in, that means that not having a degree is any sort of advantage. It's not. Not having a degree, not having a formal education is definitely still a relative disadvantage. But clearly, because I don't have a computer science degree, I've never stepped into an IT class in my life, and I had all of 1 week's experience at a boot camp. Clearly, formal education is not the only thing that works. Welcome to Easier Said Than Done with me, Zubin Pratap, where I share with you the tens of thousands of dollars worth of self-development that I did on my journey from 37-year-old lawyer to professional software engineer. The goal of this podcast is to show you how to actually do those things that are easier said than done. Hey guys, welcome back to Easier Said Than Done and how to do it. So in today's episode, what I really want to talk to you about is the really difficult problem of trade-offs, of making hard choices when you've got different options and each option means giving up other things. Okay, so really we're talking about the dilemmas and trilemmas we have when facing a prospect of learning to code or career change or acquiring new skills or anything else, and understanding the implications of our choices. Meaning, when we take a choice, we're giving up certain other options, and we have to be okay with that, and we have to understand how to work with it. So that's really the goal of today's conversation. Now, I'm going to apply this to the context of coding, of course, because that's really what my attention's focused on at the moment, helping all these students that I have around the world successfully transition their careers safely while they hold on to their current jobs. And that itself is a bunch of choices. If you're paying attention to what I said there are trade-offs involved in that, and we'll go through all of that in detail. But even though this is right now about coding in this context, everything I've learned here is in the context of career change, because I've done career changes before, fairly big ones, and it's also in the context of making good decisions in your life generally. Okay, so with that said, let me now just share my screen as I normally do to this workshop stuff that I have, and that I give you access to all these documents anyway. But let's talk about what a trilemma is. Right now, a dilemma is when you have a really tough decision to make, usually between two or more choices. The dilemma is any situation where you have multiple opportunities or pathways in front of you and you don't know which one you want to take, because there are consequences to taking each of them and sacrifices required. Now, trilemma is a word specifically made up in the context of when you have to deal with three choices specifically and you have to choose between them. And we'll talk about what I mean by trilemma in a moment in the context of coding, because the same trilemma, by the way, exists in everything in life. It's really quite extraordinary that there are these trade-offs that need to be made, whether it's stuff in technology, whether it's in the delivery of services, whether it's choosing a car, whether it's going on a holiday, whether it's the kind of accommodation you have on a holiday, and even on stuff like the blockchain. There are trilemmas in the blockchain as well. So let me now just talk a little bit about trade-offs. Let's understand together what I mean by trade-offs. Yeah, a trade-off is something that you have to give up. Example, every day that you spend learning to code, you have to give up that time on spending on Netflix or Instagram or going out with friends or a concert or something like that, right? So there's a trade-off, there's a decision, and the Latin word for decision comes from desire, I think, which means to cut off, to permanently remove the option off, right? To completely excise, to cut off something. So that's where the word decision comes from, which implicitly means that you have to let go of something, cut it off, and give it up, right? Now, that's what a trade-off really is. A trade-off is, I will take this, and in order to take this, I need to give something else up, which means it's all about giving things up, giving something up so that you can get something in its place. Okay, that's why it's a trade-off. Now, it's not always giving something up to get something back. Often you have to give something up or not get something back for a long time. So you give something up now and you maybe will get it back later. And that's more of a sacrifice, less of a trade-off. It's a kind of trade-off, I guess. It's a subcategory, if you like, of trade-offs. But it's basically sacrifices where you give up something now, you sacrifice something now, and give it up entirely so that you can make room for the opportunities you want to pursue. And that also leads me to something called opportunity cost, which is really more of a finance concept and even a negotiation concept, but it's true of all of life, right? And what that means is An opportunity cost is basically an alternative that you could have taken, which could have given you at least as much gain or benefit or profit, but you chose not to take, right? So that is the opportunity that you gave up in order to pursue the opportunity that you did pursue. And I've linked here to the Wikipedia article. I mean, you know how Wikipedia is, right? It can be a little bit hard to understand sometimes because they go too theoretical, but that's basically what an opportunity cost is. The cost of pursuing one opportunity is usually all the other opportunities you did not take up. Okay, so now that we have these clear concepts in mind about trade-offs, let's talk about the fact that this is not something new. This is the nature of the universe. Okay, this has been the way it is through history. In fact, anytime a predator, let's say a lion or a cheetah in Africa, right? Anytime it chooses on one wildebeest or deer to go after, it's giving up all the other opportunities in that herd. Okay, and it's taking a risk because it may hurt itself. It may not catch the prey. The prey may, end up kicking it in the ribs and shattering its ribs. You never know. So it's taking a risk. It's pursuing one opportunity. And it's giving up all the other animals in the herd in order to go after this one deer. So that's the nature of an opportunity cost. So it's just part of the way the universe works. Okay. Unfortunately, in modern society, especially in a post-Instagram world, we are so addicted to instant gratification and we are so convinced by all these influences out there that we can get things really, really fast without too much sacrifice. And some of us, we don't like having to accept that we may not get things we want on the terms we want. Much of modern society is conditioned to get instant gratification for everything. We want it all. We want it on our terms. We want it now. We want it in a way that's convenient for us. We want it in a way that's packaged in a way that suits us at a time that suits us, and ideally with minimum effort or sacrifice, right? That's just not how the universe works. So indeed, not any market, and the labor market's one of them as well, doesn't work like that. So let's be clear, learning to code, becoming a professional coder are two different things, and both of them involve some pretty big trade-offs. Now, for those of you who haven't heard any of my stuff before the podcast I've been on, if you're confused by why I say learning to code is totally different from becoming a coder, please check out some of my other stuff on my YouTube channel, on Spotify, or on some of the interviews I've done. You can go to my link tree. I'll link it in the show notes, and you can see why in detail I will break down how and why I've come to the conclusion that learning to code is totally different from being a professional coder. And by the way, that's a view I had when I had my first developer job, because it was very clear to me then from previous careers I'd done that having the skill is totally different from being employed for that skill. Okay, so learning to code has some pretty big trade-offs, as does becoming a professional programmer. Now, to further contextualize this idea of really difficult trilemma, let me show you the most famous trilemma of them all, right? So for those of you who are only listening and not watching, there's three circles that are intersecting equally, like a three-circle Venn diagram, okay? And one circle says good, the other circle says fast, and the other circle says cheap. And the famous trilemma is you can't have all three. It's true, it doesn't exist. An intersection between all these three does not exist. You can have 2 out of 3. Even that is less true these days because generally the cheapest things aren't necessarily good and they're not necessarily fast, right? However, things like fast food and stuff are an exception, right? Or things like toasters, yeah, they can be cheap and reasonably fast. They may not be good quality. So that's what we typically mean by good. So good typically means good quality, or efficacious is the formal term, something that's effective at getting what it's meant to, at delivering what it's meant to deliver. That's what good means. Fast is simply how soon can you get the result that you're hoping to get by doing this thing. And cheap is, of course, does it cost money? How much money does it cost? Is it expensive, etc.? Now keep in mind, what's cheap for one person may be expensive for another. What's expensive for one person may be very cheap for another, right? That's just how it is. So it's all relative. And so this is the nature of the trilemma. You can have 2 out of the following 3, good, fast, cheap. You cannot have all 3 together, right? This is true of all things. Like I said, this is true in the IT industry, IT delivery. It's true in the construction industry. It's true of cars. It's true of learning to code and all of that. So we'll talk about more of that. But you see, essentially what's happening here is there are trade-offs to be made. For example, if you have some amount of cash, but you don't have a lot of time, then you want something that's good and fast. Right? Hi, if you want a no BS insight into how to change your career, whether to code or something else, and how to actually get job opportunities in tech, then please subscribe and like. It's no BS because I have zero incentive to mislead you. I just want to help you and give you tons of value so that you will consider working with me to get to your next career. But I do post content here regularly, and by subscribing and liking and hitting that notification bell, you will get to know when I post new industry insights for you. You'll also know within about 3 seconds if you want to learn more, but at least you won't miss out. Oh, and please follow me on LinkedIn too. I pretty much post there every single day. Just look for my name, Zubin Pratap. All right, so please like and subscribe to this channel, and let's get back to the episode. And you don't mind that it's not cheap or that it costs a bit of money, because that's the way you want to do it. Classic example is when you go for a holiday, you'd rather fly there than take a bus or a ship, right? Why? Because it's good and fast. It gets you there much faster. You have more time for the holiday. But yeah, it costs you a lot more than, let's say, taking a train would, right? That's the trade-off. Now, let me give you a more everyday example, because I don't even own a car anymore, right? Because I live in the city of Melbourne and I can ride my bike everywhere and public transport's good. But there are choices that need to be made. So for example, on any given day, I may need to choose, do I want to walk? Do I want to take a bus or public transport? Or do I want to take an Uber, right? So these are my three big choices. Of course, I could walk. Anywhere is walking distance if you have enough time, right? If I'm walking 5 miles and it's going to take me an hour, if I had the time, great. There's nothing wrong with that, right? So it's free to walk. It's not fast at all. It's the slowest of the lot. And there are huge opportunity costs. For example, in that 1 hour, I could be doing something else. Maybe I could go to the gym for a workout. Maybe I could be reading a book. Maybe I could be making another podcast. Maybe I could be writing some code. There's an opportunity cost there, right? That time can be used for other things. Plus, it's really not very convenient. For example, what if it starts raining? What if it's too hot? What if the road is really uncomfortable and you have to go through freeways? There are all kinds of discomforts involved, right? So it's not very convenient to necessarily walk to a lot of places. But where it is, it's fine. So that's one option. The next option is taking a bus or some form of public transport. Now, of course, that's going to cost a bit of money, right? It's faster than walking for sure, but it could still take a fair bit of time depending on how the public transport is routed, depending on what the route is, depending on where I'm trying to go, etc. And it's often quite inconvenient. It doesn't come to my door, for example. So I need to walk someplace to a bus stop or a train stop or a tram stop, and I gather with a whole bunch of other people at the stop and wait there. So there's wait times on the boarding side, there's wait times on the drop-off side, because it doesn't actually drop me off directly to the door of my destination. It may drop me off, either 5 minutes away or 20 minutes away. I don't know, and it depends on where my destination is. So there's still a lot of stuff you need to figure out, but it's definitely faster than walking. It's definitely more convenient than walking, but it still has a lot of inconveniences and discomfort, and definitely a price tag attached to it. And then there's the Uber option, right? Which is on demand. It's on my schedule. It picks me up at my door. They give me a bottle of water. There's a good conversation. There's a pleasant experience. It's not shared or crowded or uncomfortable or trouble finding a seat. It drops me off at the exact destination that I decided, and I can jump out and I'm where I want, and it just smoothly takes it out of my credit card, right? Now, no question, it's the fastest option. No question, it's the most reliable option, because public transport can get cancelled or delayed and so on. Right? Faster, way more reliable. You kind of know you're going to get there unless it's a bad accident. For all other reasons, you're going to get there. So it's fast, it's way more comfortable and convenient, but it is also the most expensive of the lot. So again, that's the classic trilemma, right? It's fast, it's the best of the lot in terms of quality and goodness, if you like, but it's definitely not the cheapest. It's the most expensive alternative. So this is a classic example of trade-offs, and we all make these every day in our life. Every single day in our life, we make these trade-offs, right? And without realizing it, we do it a lot with our careers as well. And we do it because we're conditioned to be afraid of some things, right? We're afraid of loss. And so it drives really strange behaviors. But I'll get to that in a moment. Now, I want to make a quick qualification here, folks. When I say something is expensive or something is cheap and not good, it's not necessarily a judgment of right or wrong, because these are all perfectly valid choices, okay? These are all valid choices. Whether I walk, take public transport, or I drive, or I take an Uber, they're all valid choices. But the question is a given choice better for the individual? So is a specific choice the right choice in that context for that person? So it's very specific to the person, okay? Which is why when I work with my students, I will always have a call with students before I take them into my program to say, first and foremost, is this right? Is this right for you? Is this right for me? Because I'm the coach and I need to spend 6 to 12 months of my life working with you, getting results for you. And similarly for you, you've got to work with me. You're the one who has to put in the effort, because I can't do the learning for you. I've already done mine. You've got to do yours. And it's got to be a good fit, both emotionally, intellectually, in terms of our philosophies, in terms of the goals, and whether or not I can actually deliver it to you, right? So there has to be a question of, is it right for the person or not? So there's no right or wrong objectively. It's, is it right in this context for this person? And some choices, there's no question about it, are better than others for the specific individual, right? So there are such things as good judgment and bad judgment, good choices and bad choices. Now, let me give you an example. So let's say a person cannot afford an Uber, right? And so naturally, because they can't afford an Uber, they've got to take public transport, let's say in this example, which means they've got to be a whole lot more organized about their timing. They've got to get to the bus stop on time. They've got to, account for the fact that the bus may be very crowded or the train may be very crowded. There may not be opportunities to board that train at that time, or that the train may be late. And so what do you do then? So you got to build all this buffer and planning, okay? Now, maybe it doesn't matter on most days, but what if this person is really late for an interview? Right? They're super late for an important meeting like an interview, and the bus or the train gets delayed or cancelled. Now, they can't afford an Uber. So what's their choices, right? Most likely people will say, well, I can't really afford it, but I'll find a way anyway. And somehow people who can't afford it will find a way when the tax man comes collecting or somebody else comes collecting, they'll find a way. So if the situation is important enough, people who can't afford it will find a way. They'll ask a friend, they'll borrow from somebody, they'll find a way, right? But what if somebody had access to somebody to lend them money, for example, but then did not choose to use that because they did not want to borrow money, and so they missed the job interview, which is important to them. Now, again, there's no right or wrong, but I think most people would argue, well, that's not the best decision in the circumstance, because if the job interview is really important and is going to give you income in the future, you kind of got to put your best foot forward, even if it's not the easiest or most convenient. Now, let's flip that example around, right? What if someone who does have enough money for an Uber chooses to be at a public transport? Nothing wrong with that at all. But then the train is late, right? So they can easily take an Uber, but they're waiting at the station and the train station, and the train is late. And then they decide not to spend the money on an Uber because they didn't want to be bothered spending the money, and they missed the job interview. So they can afford the Uber, but they chose not to spend it because they rather wanted to hold the money and they were willing to risk the job interview. Now, most people would say that's not the smartest or the wisest decision, depending on your goals, about whether it's the right thing for that person. The question is, for that person in that moment, was that a wise decision or not so much? And this is the classic problem of trade-offs, of dilemmas, of trilemmas. There's no right or wrong, but there is a right or wrong for you. And that's an important part, because it gives us the power to take responsibility and say, well, maybe I'm saving money is a good thing most of the time, but in this circumstance, I need to invest the money correctly. Or you say, maybe investing the money is the right situation or the right strategy a lot of times, but in this situation, I'm going to hold on to that money. Businesses do this all the time, right? So anytime there's a down market in the job market, a lot of companies have the cash, but they're choosing not to invest it. When the market's good, they choose to invest that cash, right? It's a judgment call. And some people do it right, and some people screw up and make mistakes. And that's just how it is. Or some companies do the same thing, right? They misallocate their funds. The same principle. There's no right or wrong universally, but there is a right or wrong for that circumstance, in that context, and that person. So let's talk about the coding dilemma, right? Fast, good, cheap. Once again, it's all relative to you. Now, a 25-year-old person would probably be happier to spend more time rather than spend more money on things. Maybe they have less money and they have a lot more time ahead of them, right? It's a trade-off. So they're like, okay, if this takes me 3 years to try and figure out what I want to do in my life with my career, not uncommon, right? Maybe I'll go traveling for a year. Maybe I'll try this and I'll try that and I'll do this and I'll do that for 3 years and then decide. That's what a lot of people when they're young do, right? I did that too. So when you're doing that, that's because you have more time and you'd rather spend the time rather than spend the money. And that makes a lot of sense at that stage in your life. But what about someone who is older, 35 years old, let's say, and, kind of short of time, right? Because they're almost halfway to their career. By the time you're 40, you're about halfway through your career. And you're like, okay, I don't have a great deal of time to get to the kind of career level, salary, promotion, seniority that I like. I kind of need to make this jump soon. Now, to that person, time is going to be way more valuable than money. And I know this because that was the situation I was in, right? But there's a friend of mine, Michael, who I met while I was at Google, who's now at DeepMind. Great guy. I should actually have him on the show. Fantastic guy. He was a consultant, and I think he was 29 or 30 when he realized he was very unhappy after being 6 or 7 years as a consultant. He was quite unhappy, and he took a massive risk, right? He's from Melbourne in Australia, and he pulled out all his savings. I think it was, near the six figures at that point of time. And he pulled all of that out and went to the US and invested it in a master's of data science, not knowing whether he was going to get a job at the end of it, because we all know there's no guarantees, when it comes to this kind of stuff. He didn't know that, but he calculated one thing in his head. He said, look, I have this cash. I may not have it in the future, and I want to invest in myself now, because if I invest it, there's a very high chance that I'll get recovered. If I don't invest it, my chance of success is much lower. So he invested in I think he went to Stanford or something. I can't remember, right? He went to a really good school and he did his master's there in data science and machine learning, and then he joined Google. So it paid off for him, right? And now he's a deep mind. So it really, really paid off for him. But he will tell you, as he's told me over many lunches, that it wasn't an easy decision. It wasn't a comfortable decision, because obviously the more money you're spending, the more it feels like a loss, the more it feels like a risk, right? Like spending 10K is so much easier than spending 80K. And that's because either way, it's a lot of money, but it's really a lot of money when it's all your savings and stuff. But he knew that there was a much higher probability of success by doing it that way than by not doing it that way. And for him, the time was important. He wanted to accelerate it. And sure enough, within 18 months, he was in Google, right? So that's an example of someone saying, okay, I'm going to make the trade-off. I'm going to invest the cash I have, and I'm going to gain back an extra 5 years of seniority in my career, get to the goal. And even if I don't land at Google, I'll probably get a really good job in Silicon Valley. Like, he was pretty confident of that, right? Because he was investing in the right kind of tools in education. So that's an example. Now, same thing in code. You can learn to code in multiple ways, and there's no right or wrong way, but there is a right or wrong way for you. Unfortunately, that's the truth, right? Because no matter how hard we work, if we're going in the wrong direction or we're using the wrong levers, we're not going to get the results we want. We need to use the right tools. So similarly, for most of us and for a lot of people in different parts of the world, especially, DIY, learning yourself on your own, trying to figure it out from the internet, is probably the only way a lot of people can do it. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. I spent a large portion of my 30s trying to do it that way, and it wasn't quite working for me, but I've done it that way. So I understand the impulse. I understand the impulse to not want to invest in a boot camp. And for those of you who followed my podcast, I did eventually invest in a boot camp. I borrowed, $54,000, and then I quit at the end of 1 week and lost $9,000 because it wasn't the right fit for me. But there was no way I could have known that until I'd taken the risk and done it. And I did lose. I lost $9,000, right? So, and it was $9,000 of a mortgage after my startup failed and after I'd lost a lot of cash and didn't have income coming in for 2 years. So it really hurt. But it taught me a lot of valuable lessons, and I made the most of that failure. So now, again, not everyone can do that. I totally get it. So for most of the world, DIY, learning on your own, flying blind, is perhaps the best way you can do it. And you try and guess your way to success, and great, there's nothing wrong with that. The reality is it is the cheapest option, and therefore it's not the fastest option. It is definitely the slowest option, and it's also the riskiest option. So, let me try and break it down this way. When you DIY, yes, you save a lot of money. It's super cheap. You get to hold on to the money. So there's no risk financially, unless you calculate the high probability of failure, because it's much more likely you're not going to succeed when you're doing it yourself and you're guessing. And so for those of you who are looking to increase your salary, the risk is that you'll never increase your salary. Not that you'll lose the money you could have spent in a boot camp. Yes, there's that too. But the real risk is the unearned income that you're never going to access. But that's a trade-off. At least it's cheap. You're not spending money right now. You don't have the money, and that's understandable. A lot of people won't. That's just normal for a lot of people. And so you just have to take the chance and go, okay, I'm going to try and figure this out for myself. It's going to be slow. I'm probably going to find it really miserable and stressful and extremely, extremely confusing and overwhelming, but that's just how it is, right? And the risk of success is low, but I understand that. That's a trade-off I'm willing to make. Now, the next option is, colleges or boot camps, doing a computer science degree or a boot camp. Again, these are slightly different options because computer science degrees are much longer, they're more expensive. Boot camps are much more short, very intense, but they don't give you the same depth of knowledge. Obviously, they don't. How can you do in 4 months what you'd otherwise do in 2 years? That's not realistic or feasible. And so there are trade-offs here as well. Now, of course, they're faster, way faster than trying to do it on your own. No question. No question about it. And for a lot of people, this is a good experience. But boot camps, for example, can be a negative experience for some people because in 6 or 12 or 14 weeks or however long that boot camp is, they compress a lot and they require you to do 10 hours a day, and it's intense and it's a sink or swim sort of thing. You have to get done or you get kicked out. I've had lots of people from boot camps come to my program, lots of them, because they just couldn't cope with the actual boot camp. It was too intense, and they felt that they weren't learning. They were so stressed trying to rush through it that they weren't learning. It's not the case for everybody. Plenty of people have succeeded at boot camps, especially people with some prior background. They're very likely to succeed at boot camps, and boot camps are great for them. But the costs are high. There's the fee of the boot camp, and then for the good ones, because most boot camps aren't very good, but the good ones are going to require full-time attention and attendance, which means you're giving up your job. And therefore that means you're losing income. So the total cost to you is your lost income for that 6 to 12 month period, because most of the times it'll take 6 to 12 months to actually learn everything you need to become professionally hired and find a job. And then there's the cost of the bootcamp. So your total fee is cost of bootcamp plus lost income, right? Because you're actually losing cash for that period. So, you know, it works for a lot of people. It's great. There's nothing wrong with it. If you've got the cash and you've got the time, do a bootcamp. No question about it, right? But the costs are high, but it doesn't work for everybody. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing for other people. And a lot of people don't necessarily want to be taught the exact identical thing that other people are being taught, because it kind of assumes you're at the same starting point and you want to end up at the same ending point. It's kind of like the bus stop, or it's like the bus experience. It's not really door to door. It just tells you, hey, if you're interested in exactly this combination of skills, then fine. You have to be at this starting point. If you're not going to keep up. And a lot of boot camps have entrance tests for this reason. And it says like, well, all right, this is what we're going to do. It's a fixed curriculum. There's no customization of this at all. So this is where we drop you off. That's where we finish up, right? So that's the end-to-end path in a lot of the colleges and boot camps. It's the same thing. It's basically structured, right? Structured, standardized education is all the same things. Same starting point, same ending point for everybody, and there's a price tag involved. And look, they're great services. They compress into a short period of time what would otherwise take people years and years and years. They do it really fast. They give you all the stuff that you need. They take away all the decision making, and they keep you accountable. So it's great. It works for a lot of people. So that's definitely a good option. And if you can, you should do it. The third option is what I ended up wishing that I had for myself after 5.5 years of stumbling around. And that's why I ended up creating this offer for people, is personalized coaching. Because I was at a lot of money at that point in time. I hadn't been earning income for a couple of years, and I was spending money trying to redo my career into a coding career. And I was 37, 38, I think, at this point in time. And so I said, I can't believe I can't find a personal coach. I did find a coach, and she was more of a career sort of coach, completely non-technical. But frankly, she helped me so much. Like, I doubt that I would have made the transition successfully after 4 years of trying had she not helped. But I realized what was really needed is a combination of career coaching, real quality career coaching, and a little bit of life coaching, but really career coaching, and technical guidance and coaching and structuring, right? And then there's all the stuff about understanding what the hiring side is, which I happen to have from my past background, both in tech on the hiring side, but also non-tech roles. So I wanted to combine all of these things into a personal coaching offer, and that's what I ended up creating the Future Coders Inner Circle program for. Now, in terms of speed, it's about the same as a bootcamp, 6 to 12 months for most people, right? And depending on the circumstances, it could be a bit longer. Like, one of my students got married in the middle, and so obviously 2 months went off in that and things like that. And so, but that it's personalized. It's not a big deal if you need to do that. We just adjust the end dates, but it's a comfortable experience that way, right? And I customize it to every person, because I've got students in more than 8 countries now that I've worked with over the last 3 years, and pretty much 100% of the people who follow my plan will get the results. And so that means it's completely customized. I understand what starting level they're at, what their timing is, and if they've got 15 to 20 hours a week, they're welcome to join the program, assuming they meet other requirements as well. But ultimately, it's a question of where are they in their life? Do they have kids? Do they have a full-time job? How much free time do they have? How do we structure that time? How long is this going to take? What do they need to learn? Which country are they in? What does that country value in terms of the job market? How is recruitment done in that country? And finally, what do they need to learn when, which order, and so on and so forth. So it takes a lot of time, and it takes, when I say time, it's not the kind of thing that you can do in a weekend. It's not the kind of thing you can do in a 3-month boot camp. There's a consistent process, and that I now follow, and I customize it to everybody, right? So it is generally cheaper than a boot camp because I don't do the huge numbers, right? So I don't have all the overheads. It's cheaper than the best boot camps in the US for sure, quite a bit cheaper. And it's a lot longer because I tell people I'd rather you take a bit more time than rush and burn out. And also, we want to get it right. We absolutely want to get it right. We don't want to standardize and give you all the same thing. No 2 students get the same plan. For me, not so far anyway. It's never happened because different countries, different people, different goals, different starting points, all means that everybody's plan ends up being quite different. And of course, so those are the trade-offs there, right? It's going to cost a bit of money to work with me, but it's probably going to take 6 to 12 months with me, but it's going to be personalized. So it's going to be extremely comfortable, convenient, and well, I wouldn't say comfortable because I push my students quite hard in terms of their some of the psychology and mindset stuff and some of the excuses that people come up with. But it's definitely a lot more. It's an Uber ride. You're basically going to get taken from where you are and delivered to your destination. And of course, there's a price tag attached. It's less than boot camps and so on and so forth. So those are just trade-offs. I'm not saying it's right. In fact, for most people, I will actually end up saying no to them when they ask to be in my program, because I'm not going to work with someone that I'm not sure I'm going to succeed for, because I have a track record I need to maintain. So purely selfish reasons there as well. I don't want to disappoint other people, of course. But if I say that, people will be like, oh, that can't be the real reason. Well, the real reason is I don't want to disappoint other people. I take people's careers very, very seriously. It affects multiple generations, and it affects people's confidence. It affects their sense of self. It affects their futures. It's a big responsibility to help somebody with their career. Huge responsibility. So I don't want to take that on if I'm not confident I can deliver. And I don't want to take that on if I'm not confident that I can continue my track record, because I worked very hard for that. So, it's in my interest to make sure my students succeed. And therefore, it's in my interest to make sure I choose the kind of students who are likely to succeed and who are willing to stay committed for a sustained period of time and think really big with their careers. So these are all trade-offs, right? So now I would compare, doing it yourself to probably walking, and, boot camps and colleges to taking a bus. You all land up at the starting point that's the same, and then you land up at the ending point that's the same. And I would explain how I do with personal coaching more of an Uber thing. I understand where you're at, and I come to you, and we build a plan starting from where you're at, and then we build all the way to the goal that's specific to you. And so that obviously takes a lot more time. Now, all this aside, I know a lot of people complain out there about, well, why should any of us do a CS degree? It's not needed anymore. The recruiters aren't using it. The recruiters don't require it, is the argument, and we can do it for free anyway. So, why should we do it? And, you're right. IT is probably one of the spaces where you don't need a formal degree to get in. That's probably true. But that's not the same thing as saying that your chances are high without a formal degree. That is absolutely not true. Your chances are way higher with a computer science degree, right? And that's only because people don't think the computer science degree means you're going to be great at the job. What they know it means is that you've had the basic training from a decent institution, and you've had the ability to stick to something long enough to get that degree, because those are highly structured environments, and you basically have the ability to stick to something and see it through. That's the real signal that they get. And you have the domain expertise or some knowledge in that space because you've been trained on the classical, sort of concepts in that place. So absolutely, having formal education is a huge advantage. Don't kid yourselves into thinking that just because the technology is a space where people without degrees can get in, that means that not having a degree is any sort of advantage. It's not having a degree, not having a formal education is definitely still a relative disadvantage. But clearly, because I don't have a computer science degree, I've never stepped into an IT class in my life, and I had all of 1 week's experience at a boot camp. Clearly, formal education is not the only thing that works. And as long as you're able to build the skills and demonstrate it, yes, IT is a place where you can demonstrate it without having a piece of paper. But getting to the level where you can demonstrate a professional grade skill is hard, right? So that's why CS degrees and boot camps are still popular, and they should be. They are really, really great services. They save you all the trial and error that would otherwise probably cause you to give up. And as I spoke recently with John Cricket on his podcast, as he pointed out, curation is a hugely valuable thing. What does curation mean? Curation means taking away all the decision making and giving you the bits that are most relevant for you, right? Filtering out all the crap, all the crud, all the noise. That's a hugely valuable thing because it saves you a ton of time, it saves you a lot of attention, and most importantly, it increases the odds of success, right? So your opportunity cost gets smaller as the more and better the curation is. So that's why CS degrees and bootcamps are still popular, and they should be, because the trade-off is very real. You invest your money and it's easier and faster. That's a damn good deal if you ask me. Like anything else in life, if it's going to save you time and effort and make it much more comfortable and convenient and higher probability of success, that's worth money. There's no doubt about it. So, you can, of course, choose to keep the money and choose the slow, frustrating, confusing route. It'll take a lot more motivation and effort and consistency and patience for you to actually get there. That's totally true. But hey, that's a trade-off. It's your life. You've got to make it, right? And sometimes people cannot afford these things, and so they have to take the long route, and that's just how it is. Now, Personally, I knew that there was a very, very high chance that I would make back the money I invested in any education I did. Now, I even did an MBA and it was from a really good school. And I'm in two minds about whether it was worth all the money I paid for it, which probably gives you a sense of, how much I probably paid for it. I paid quite a lot and I saved up for 2.5 years for that. So that's another thing. Like, I truly believe if you want to succeed at these kind of things, at career change and coding and stuff, you need to play long games, right? If you're thinking in terms of 6 months, you're probably not going to make it. I'd say if you're thinking less than 2 to 5 years, you're probably not going to have the sticking power required to actually build the career you need. You can get your first coding job in 12 months. All my students do. That's not the problem. The problem is building the career, but also my students do it in 12 months because they've got me to show them the way, right? Like I'm literally hand holding them the entire step of the way. But if you don't, then you need to be thinking 3 to 5 year timelines, assuming you can stay consistent and motivated the entire time. Now, I'm probably going to sound like a hypocrite by saying all this because I did not follow this advice for 10 years because I didn't know. Now I know, so I've changed my mind about what I would have done differently. If I could go back, I would have done all this differently. It took me 8 to 10 years to leave the career that I didn't really want to do. Why? It was too risky for me to leave. I had all these reasons to stay. None of them were good reasons, but they were all basically about fear. I don't want to lose the money. I don't want to use the prestige. I don't want to lose the time I've invested all this while. That's the sunk cost fallacy. But others, like Michael, took half that time, 6 or 7 years to decide to leave. And still others that I've met have joined my program after 3 or 4 years in a career, 2 years in a career, and they just decided, okay, you know what? It's risky for me to leave this and to give up on what I've committed so much time, effort, and money to and got a formal degree in. But there's something else that I really want to do, and my life is going to be less if I don't pursue it. And the risk of pursuing something is lower than the risk of staying in something and giving up all those opportunities that could have been my way. Again, opportunity cost, right? The trade-offs are real. And for a lot of people, even though it's risky for them to leave, it's much riskier for them to not make a change. And that's the nature of life. There's a trade-off. There's risks both ways. The risk of not changing is often bigger than the risk of trying. That's just how it is, right? So, guys, that was a long conversation about all of this, but it's a very deep conversation. And I dare say it's probably not an entertaining conversation, but really, I've compressed more than 10 years of experience and insight into this thing and some of the best coaching that I've ever received, the best models of thinking about risk, investment, allocation of time and attention. I've kind of tried to share all of that with you here. It's easiest to just think about it in terms of metaphors. Walk, bus, Uber. There's a time and a place for each of these things. There's no right or wrong, but there's a better decision for a given circumstance, right? And you've got to decide what your circumstances is, which place in your life you're in now. Maybe you're in a place in your life where walking or taking a bus is fine. Great. Do that. Do that. But if you're doing that because you're too afraid to risk an Uber and you know you ought to, that's when the decision making should be questioned and examined. Okay, so you have to use your judgment on this because life is a bunch of judgment calls and decisions. And yeah, the people who make better decisions get further in life. So you have to make the decision for yourself. This is also what I help a lot of my students with, is some of the decision-making process. But that's after they've taken the decision to work with me, which from their point of view, of course, it's a risk. I mean, of course, it's a risk, right? They're taking a risk and me and or taking a chance on me. In their eyes, they're like, wow, I'm going to embark on this adventure with Zubin and I hope I get there. And of course there's risk, right? There's risk for me too. Like if they don't do the work I tell them and they don't get the results, then it kind of affects my reputation. And there's nothing that'll recover a reputation. It's not easy to do that. So guys, everything has risk, everything has trade-offs. And decision making comes down to taking some gutsy decisions using your head and your heart. There's never one or the other, and you have to be okay with the trade-offs and the risks that you take. Okay, I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you next time. Now, for those of you who are watching this for the first time, look, I'd love it if you could like and subscribe to this channel or to this podcast, depending on how you're consuming it, because the more love I get from you guys, the more motivated I get, right? It's exactly the same with you. The more positive feedback you get in your journey, the more motivated you are. So, pay it forward, help me out here a little bit, and I'll be glad to help you out in any way I can as well. But I hope you got a ton of value for this. And whatever you do, remember, it's your life, it's your responsibility, it's your decision. You get to live with the consequences of your choices. So keep your chin up and do the best you can, and don't be afraid. All right, I'll see you another time.
Do it. Just subscribe. You know you got to do it.